TVOT.
So, an addressable TV advertising system sounds like a really good idea. And these gentlemen here are going to tell us how it's going to happen, I think. So, I'm going to hand this off to Walt, and I hope this is fun.
Okay. Thank you, Suzanne. So, welcome, everyone. Hope you had a good lunch, enjoyed the sunshine outdoors. We're here in the highly coveted after lunch day part on day 2 of the conference. So, given that we have a meaty topic, we're going to try to keep it very lively.
I wanted to share my spot there.
All right, you got front row to be the heckler. So what we're talking about is a formation of an addressable advertising TV ecosystem, and very much with the question of, are we reinventing an existing ecosystem from display advertising? So a lot of this is going to be doing contrasts and comparison between what we see in display and then what may emerge in addressable television. So let me just provide some context to get us started, and then I'll do an introduction of the panel. So we're going to talk about the business ecosystem of addressable TV, and I want to kind of go back to some predictions that Tracy made last year at this conference. You know, she said 2010 is going to be the year that it's all going to happen, and I'm happy to say that, you know, as we sit here a year later, it looks like Tracy's prediction really has come true. We've had, you know, from all of the other panels that we've seen this session, that EBIF deployment has really reached wide scale. In addressable television specifically, Cablevision has turned up its 3 million households in the New York footprint. This year, DirecTV has forecast to deploy addressable television nationwide. And now it looks like that a number of the other cable MSOs are starting to get the religion as well. So it looks like the momentum has really started and deployment is underway. So I think, given that we've got the technology getting rolled out, there now comes the question of, what does addressability do either to or for the massive TV planning and buying ecosystem that currently exists and has been in place for years? So we've gathered a panel of experts from across the array of the media ecosystem to talk about that and to provide their background. So I'm going to start by introducing from the end here, Praveen Chandraramani, who is the VP of Business Development at Simulmedia. We have Chris Allen, who is the VP of Video Innovation at SMGX, and we will learn what the X stands for today. Jonathan Ricard is the SVP of Digital at IXI, which is a leading financial data services company. And to my left is Bruce Beagle, who's the Managing Director of the Winterberry Group, who is an all-around expert on targeted media, both direct mail, display, social, and so forth. So let me start with Chris, because across the panel, I think you are the real TV guy up here. And let me just ask, what is SMGX, just to get us started? What are you guys up to in addressable TV within SMGX?
Sure. So SMGX was established a couple of years ago. It's a cross-functional division for Starcom MediaVest Group, and we're really focused on 3 major areas. So the first is leveraging the buying cloud of all the agencies within the network. The second is marketplace intelligence, and the third is innovation. So the innovation bucket is the area that I live in, and our chief area of focus right now is the deployment of Addressable and to help build that marketplace. And we found that we couldn't do it as one agency brand within the Starcom MediaVest Group family. We really needed to leverage all of our portfolio of clients to really build some momentum in the marketplace. So we signed a deal with DirecTV that Walt mentioned last fall, and we will be the first agency to deploy a household level addressable solution with those guys this fall. And the way that's going to work is that ads will be cached on the DVR, and at the appropriate point of insertion, the right ad will be delivered within that household. So at deployment, it'll be somewhere in the neighborhood of 8 to 10 million households.
And Bruce, you've worked across a whole breadth of addressable targeted media, from direct mail, display, social. You know, when we think about addressable television, what problem are we really solving with addressable TV?
I think, when we think about addressing and targeted media, it was, okay, we're starting at the DMA level, and you're addressing an area, then you move it down, you say we're going to get to the household, and then you go to the individuals within the household, which we've been doing with direct mail and email for a very long time. And what we're looking at here is, here's the screen that people gather around. How do we parse that? How do we know and understand who's viewing what and when? And how do we take that data and make it very actionable to start relevant conversations? And that's a challenge. It's a holy grail because there are so many TVs. And people spend so much of their media consumption time on TV. So for many marketers, it's how do we reach people in their home when it's easy for them to transact?
And what does that do for an advertiser? Do you see that making their media buy more efficient? Is it more effective? Is it a combination of both?
It's effectiveness. Efficiency, if you think about the ecosystem that's going to be involved, right now buying advertising on TV is actually pretty easy. I call my agency, you buy it, somebody makes the ad, and I'm done. There's less friction in buying TV advertising today than in almost any other media. So what we're going to do with introducing targeting is we're going to make this really complex. We're going to make it really, really hard because we're going to bring in data management. We're going to bring in better attribution systems. We're going to start looking at how does this interact across other channels. So I think it's going to be a more complex ecosystem, but at the end of the day, we've got a TV in almost every single home. And we need to reach those people. They're on multiple devices in that home, but it's where they are, it's their place. So it's important to get them, and it's important because they're typically in a group where buying decisions can be made. So you want to get that interactivity. The other side of this is you want to avoid the whole kid thing. We've got new privacy legislation on do not track kids, personally identifiable information. Anything that has to do with children in the home and addressability is going to be an issue. So how do I know whether it's the kids are watching or the adults are watching?
If I might sort of jump on that, I absolutely agree with you. It's going to create a lot of complexity in the television marketplace that doesn't currently exist. But I would actually say that efficiency is the bigger opportunity, at least from an advertiser perspective, because suddenly if I have a situation where my brands can choose the homes, anonymously of course, that they want to deliver messages to, and they don't have to pay for the waste, there's a huge efficiency play there for them. And that's really the draw to the marketer. Now granted, they're going to be paying a premium on a cost per thousand basis to have that opportunity, but their out-of-pocket overall is still going to be lower than it would be if they had to buy the entire footprint, the entire avail.
Well, Chris, how does then that accrue to the seller of inventory? Because, in effect, from the way I see it, that being you go from having one avail to having several avails, probably millions of avails. So does it in fact, although on a CPM basis, the inventory owner is getting a high yield, they're only getting on a portion of those avails. Do you think you'll have new advertisers come in or something like that so that there's more benefit to the inventory owner?
Yeah. So that's clearly a huge concern on the seller side, is that we're actually creating a glut of inventory in the marketplace, because splitting avails, we're actually creating additional inventory. And so there's a fear that will cause price deflation for the sellers. What we believe it's going to do is actually create a marketplace that will entice new advertisers to participate in television that haven't otherwise been able to do so, because it's actually been cost prohibitive on an out-of-pocket basis. So if you look at the direct mail business, which is killing trees, and really effective CPMs are in the thousands many times. Suddenly, if you can start to attract those advertisers that don't spend in the television space today, you're inviting a lot of new advertisers into the space to help buy that new inventory that's created.
I also think that in the performance marketing world, right now, performance marketing or direct is about 60% of ad spend. So there's a huge amount of dollars because it's very, very measurable. They'll look at this channel and they'll say, okay, as long as this fits within my allowable acquisition cost, I'm going to hammer this. And there are a lot of advertisers that do not spend money in the TV space just because the math doesn't work. But now they can do the math. And I think you'll get those performance advertisers coming over, not just the direct response television guys, but those that are doing both brand and direct.
And Bruce, I think to your point, it gets into who's the audience that's being, how are we subdividing the current pool of impressions? And if we have to have the appropriate advertiser for each subset that we go and characterize with whether it's third-party data or whether it's first-party data. And I think for the sellers of inventory, having that portfolio and doing that effort to plan ahead for that ultimate yield curve management is going to be an important part, because how they choose to segment that inventory pool is going to determine whether their current roster of advertisers supports it, or whether they need to find more advertisers to fill in the less desirable inventory impressions that may remain once the cherry picking has started to happen.
So does that also mean that in addition to managing your own inventory supply, you're going to need a yield management platform?
I think that's going to be.
We have in display?
I think you have to have a yield management platform because you've increased the volume of inventory that's available.
And is that what SMGX is building? Because I think for the sellers who are in the audience, hearing about bringing in, making new inventory, creating potentially a remnant problem, just overall has a fear of suppressing CPM. I mean, even if you say we're going to bring in new advertisers, but how do we ensure that everybody across the entire ecosystem makes money in this?
Yeah, we have to find the new value for everyone in the equation. So for the advertiser, it's an increase in efficiency by reducing the out-of-pocket required to reach the same audience, or actually a better audience, because we're looking at more robust data than just using Nielsen audience data for targeting. We're starting to look at data sets like Simul Media is using, or third-party data sets like Experian or Axiom, or even a proprietary database that a client may have. So I often use the example of Best Buy, which is one of my clients. They have their reward zone members, and if suddenly they can overlay that to the household base and understand where the reward zone members are, then they can start to affect the messaging to those different households. On the seller side, the value is going to come in the opportunity to increase their yield, attract new advertisers, and of course the consumer has an opportunity to receive incremental value as well, because suddenly they're going to get messaging that is more relevant to them. We've actually seen in some testing we've done over the last few years that when people see an ad that is more relevant to them, they actually stay tuned to the ad longer. So there's a reduction in tune away, which also actually serves the seller as well, because suddenly they're getting paid for viewership of their ads. We absolutely are going to need some sort of sophisticated system, a trading platform of sorts, to help us manage all of this, because we've got a lot of different advertisers and a lot of different pockets of inventory that are going to have to be optimized to really pack the avail the most efficiently to deliver the greatest amount of value, and that's something that can't be done with the legacy systems we have in place today.
So all this sounds very complicated, and it sounds like a lot of work. It sounds like yield optimization, trying to fit advertisers into specific networks, day parts, because context will probably continue to matter for certain advertisers. And it starts to feel a little bit like what some of the challenges have been in the display ecosystem. So if the folks in the booth could put the projector on to show the famous Terence Kawaja Luma partner slide. So, wow. This is the display advertising ecosystem, and it is complicated. It's actually, I think, slightly more complicated than the agency holding company chart that I think all of us in this room are probably familiar with. There are a lot of companies on here, and Bruce, if I could turn to you and ask you to give us your thoughts on where did this come from and who actually makes money across all these companies?
Okay. It comes from an investment bank. And investment banks put up logos to show how many people they know and how many people you could sell. And we're also owned by Petsky Prunier Investment Bank, so we have our version of these charts. But what happened was they were trying to show a level of complexity. And they were trying to show this to investors. This wasn't for the advertisers. And it wasn't actually for the publishers. This was about the $1.5 billion of venture that has funded many of these companies over the last 3 years. So these companies are springing up. Why? And this is a really important point. The money is actually flowing into the ecosystem. Display will be between 9.5 and $11 billion of revenue this year. Still relatively small compared to broadcast, compared to TV, compared to even newspapers. But it's getting there. And this ecosystem, some companies are making a lot of money. A lot of companies are making very little money, but a lot of noise. So the press, and look, they're online, so they get to make noise. It's really easy. But when you look at some of the players in here, it's the holding companies. They're really making money. It's the Axioms and the Experians. They're making some money, but not a ton of money. We size the marketing data market portion of this at somewhere around, we think it's about $400 million right now. We expect it to be about $850 million by the end of 2012. So it's the rate of growth. So money is starting to stick to the data players in the ecosystem. Some of the yield management players, the money's starting to stick. Some of the supply side players, it's starting to stick. But there are still too many players. So we haven't had the shakeout, but what we're seeing is the rate of consolidation has increased. We've never been as busy as we have been in the last 12 months. And we're a small boutique investment bank, but we're seeing this across all of our peers. The rate of deals getting done as some models work and some models don't is really, it's accelerating. Yet there's still several $billion sitting on the sidelines waiting for the next thing. And we actually, this year was the first year in our outlooks we started to cover addressable TV. It finally hit the radar. We started to get enough scale that this is going to be a fairly big business. And first we'll hear a lot of noise. Then we're going to start to see the companies getting more and more funding. And companies that are already in here, your demand side platforms, your data management platforms, they will add this channel to the other channels that they serve. So they started in display, they may have added search, they may have added email. They will add addressable TV to their platforms. And they'll go back to their venture partners and they'll say, and I need another 20 or $30 million to add this channel. But because the money is going to follow, and in this world, the money came out of newspaper for the most part. It didn't actually come out of broadcast. It came out of magazine. We think because of media consumption trends, it's still coming from that pie more than any other pie. Does that help?
No, that's very helpful. And I thought it was interesting that you say that one of the big groups who's making money are the data providers. So Jonathan, you and IXI are doing very well. I'd like your thoughts on who's suffering, who's not making money in this ecosystem.
Well, what's really interesting about this is this chart reflects, I think, one critical fact and difference from TV is that there's no scarcity in online ad impressions. One could argue there's almost limitless supply of ad impressions at this point in the marketplace. And so without that scarcity, every content producer over here on the right-hand side, and I don't want to whack Chris in the head, needs to say, how do I dispose of all this supply I've created myself, right? And so they've empowered this legion of people between them and the advertiser to go out and monetize. And typically that's been done historically through online behavioral tracking, through the presence of ad targeting through cookies and other mechanisms that work online only. Well, what's happened over the last couple of years is the advertisers said, well, I know a lot about my customers. It has nothing to do with the fact that they visited CNN and mountainclimbing.com. I know who buys. I want to bring more of that third-party data to the selection criteria. And I want to do that in a way that makes a lot of sense. and that allows me to leverage learnings and discipline I've built through direct mail, through CRM, through cross-sell, upsell. And the only way they've been able to do that has been recently the rise of the the data management platforms, where they're able to aggregate offline data and their own first-party data and say, I can make a better decision. Who's losing because of that has been the content producers. They've been selling inventory with a lot of information asymmetry, and so they're letting it go too cheaply because they don't know as much about the audience as the buy side does. And that's most of the $1.5 billion you mentioned has been on the buy side, because that's where the advertisers are, that's where the money is. The publishers have to play catch up. What we found is very successful is talking to publishers about eliminating that information asymmetry. How do you know as much about that ad impression as the people who are buying it from you, so you can extract fair market value? And I think that's the future of addressability, whether it's in TV or even more so in display over the next year. And it's been 18 months to get there. 18 months ago, everyone was talking about addressability in online, and very few folks were doing it with any real third-party data. Now it's part of and parcel of any RFP that goes out the door is, what's the data source?
So, Chris, question for you is, I see that Vivaki is on this chart. So why don't you work with Vivaki on this chart, or in one of the demand-side platforms such as a MediaMath or an Invite Media?
Mm-hmm.
Are you reinventing the future, or reinventing rather the past that's already happened in display? And then it's a two-parter. And then the second is to Jonathan's point about the display ecosystem has been informationally biased in favor of the buy side. How will you ensure that there is information symmetry in what SMGX is undertaking?
Yeah, well, first, I think maybe I'll address some of Jonathan's comments about publishers underselling the value. I think a lot of that has really been supply and demand driven, that they've sort of been forced to sell below what they think the value is, simply because a wasted impression is a wasted impression, and you can't get it back. So they've been forced to sell at a much cheaper rate than they would like to. And I guess that in itself becomes the market value. We see the television as being a pretty different animal than the display ecosystem, because again, there is a finite supply of inventory in the television space. There is a legacy approach to executing television that many of the sellers are going to be very resistant to changing. So we're going to have to show that there's incremental value to them in order for them to consider moving towards an addressable model. I mentioned we will have to have some sort of trading platform to do it. We don't call it a DSP or an SSP because we feel that inherently that comes with baggage, that it's lending more favor to one side versus the other. So we're envisioning a marketplace of sorts that is very neutral to the ecosystem. And on the agency side, we have certain levers that we can control in terms of restrictions and guardrails that we can put on how our inventory is or how our advertisers are matched to inventory. And on the seller side, they will have the same abilities to put controls on, whether it be pricing floors for their inventory, certain advertisers that they will or will not accept. So maybe there's content concerns for certain brands and certain programming that they want to avoid. We do not see it as an auction. It is a reservation approach to the market, so that we could approach it in a couple different ways. We could come as an agency holding company and commit a certain amount of volume to a specific media provider, and then do the optimization on a regular basis to match those advertisers with inventory. Or it could happen on a smaller level. So we could take one client like Kellogg's, and we could optimize across their portfolio of brands, so that it all sort of lives and exists within the Kellogg's world. I think as we get more sophisticated, we'll have multiple data streams to help us inform our decision for optimization. So it won't just be Experian, and it won't just be rent, track, set-top box data. It could be a variety of data sources that are layered one on top of the other to really give us a sort of triangulate upon where is the most appropriate place to match inventory to the advertiser. And and then there will become an ecosystem where we're starting to optimize across providers. So it's not just optimizing within, say, a pool of NBC Universal inventory. It could be all of the broadcasting cable inventory within one ecosystem. That is a number of years down the road. It's going to take some time to get us there. What we're going to have to do is prove out to the sellers are going to, I think that's going to be the hardest area for us to prove incremental value, because I think they truly are fearful of walking away from a $70 billion approach. The market is $70 billion today, and for fear of leaving any of that money on the table, we're going to have to show them that there really is new incremental value to be had by participating. So it'll start slowly, and then once they figure out that there is the value, then it'll ramp up.
And Praveen, I am going to show the simulmedia view of this world that you guys have put together. So this is a little less complex, but Praveen and the folks at Simulmedia have provided their interpretation of what the addressable TV ecosystem will look like. And I think the thing that's interesting is that Simulmedia is listed as an audience ad network. So tell us, what is the role of Simulmedia in this ecosystem? What role will you play?
Sure. So the way we saw the TV advertising system as opposed to the display advertising system, which conceivably composes of both internet and TV, is that TV firstly is highly regulated and is has a much bigger dollar amount associated with it, $10 billion versus display on the internet is roughly 10 billion. TV, as Chris mentioned, is around 60 to 70 billion. And because of high regulation and just general economics, there are far fewer players. So hence, from perspective of Simulmedia, we sell targeted advertising on TV. We work with the inventory owners to package inventory in audience type packages using set-top box data and sales data. Hence you have both inventory owners and, again, like in display, data providers participating to basically increase the yield to inventory owners for what we like to call underappreciated inventory, because most inventory owners do not have issues selling prime time. They have issues selling other day parts, such as the day part we're in now, right? We've done fairly well though, and because of that issue, and we've created a company wherein you can sell audiences on television today, even without universal addressability. And the way we do it is fundamentally just better planning using set-top box data. We believe when addressability rolls out universally, and when clients come to Chris en masse asking for it, it's just a matter of turning the switch on, because the set-top box data is already there, and the infrastructure, the supply side infrastructure to deliver addressability is also already there. But we still see that about 7 to 8 years down the line, as opposed to happening tomorrow.
So is it fair to describe you as a TV remnant inventory optimizer?
The inventory we operate in is not necessarily remnant. Like we have prime in the we're fairly ambiguous to the day parts that inventory owners would give us and the spots they give us. There's a healthy mix of all day parts across the board. It's fundamentally just helping them sell the spots that they have issues selling with, and getting new clients to them, which they traditionally would not have. So we work with a lot of cable operators, and as a result, we create a national footprint because of all the operators we work with. So we can actually divert several national brands to cable operators and satellite operators and telcos by virtue of that aggregation.
And Jonathan, I like to refer to you as the arms merchant of this industry, and you and other data providers have done very well in the display ecosystem. Do you think that your arms will be as valuable or more valuable in the addressable TV world?
Well, I think we look at it as we're going to try to bring transparency to the mechanisms by which inventory is sold. So whether that's through an exchange on Chris's side or whether that's through the existing structure of how inventory is sold, we want to add more transparency to what's actually being sold, right? How do you characterize the eyeballs? And so we look at that and say, right now, income and age is a proxy for a wealth of data that sits at the advertiser level, right? And it's the proxy that we're able to plan against and operate against. Raveen's mentioning bringing in set-top box data, right? I look at that. The digital analog is it's the click stream, right? It's the site visit stream, and so they're enriching that data set as well. And the goal is ultimately is to keep better defining and aligning the information that's available to be the unit of transaction with what the client knows is valuable to them, right? And that's how both sides win. Is that the sell side says, we know you're interested in people that meet these criteria, and we've built better measurement and better ways to identify that audience. And the advertiser says, I'm willing to pay more for those consumers, right? And that happens in layers across the ecosystem. I think that sort of unified currency of who the audience is and how valuable they are is really important, because it then provides trust in the exchange, right? And that's where we believe personally branded data is very important, and data that is known by the client and can be known by the seller as to how valuable that is and that it's unified. If it's multi-channel, even more the better, because then you can have integrated campaigns across online, television, direct mail. But I think that arms merchants suggest we're giving one side an advantage. I actually view it as we're trying to be a point of transparency.
And you're
that-
selling
I
arms
think-
to both sides.
I think arms sell to
Point
both
of
sides.
transparency, balance of information. 'Cause honestly, that's what the prior slide's built on, information asymmetry, right? The sell side doesn't know as much because they haven't been able to invest in it the way the venture money has flowed into the buy side and the technologies that provide that. So the only way you can unify that is back to the audience.
Bruce, you and I were talking earlier about a lot of the focus that you're working on, which is to try to find a consolidated or a cohesive view of combining media channels so that from the consumer's perspective, all of these different channels are coordinated so that if we've got addressable television, if we've got direct mail, if we've got display, that they are working in harmony. If we go and Chris builds a trading platform for television, and then we've got his advertisers who are also using Media Math, Invite Media, and so forth to manage their display campaigns, is this just creating more silos within these ecosystems?
I think the good news is this will actually wind up in aligned with digital. So they'll move, just like they've taken video in display, and it's still run by the display digital marketing people. This will become something that they start to add on to that. I don't think they'll create another group. I think it'll be a bit of a challenge to the agencies, because this is a different group. This was in broadcast, you're used to just going to your agency, letting them do the buying for you. Now you're going to have more choices. I think that what we're going to see first is a lot of tests. So the analytics people have to get their arms around the data. They want access to as much data as they possibly can. So the first thing they're going to do is they'll test anything. So we're going to go through a test phase, which I think is going to last about 2 years. But once you get the testing done and you can do the test control, whether they'll actually buy it right down to the individual in the household or just buy the households better, they'll be able to make a decision on, is it worth the additional cost? So I think that we're early, but I don't think it's 8 years. I actually think it's a question of a 40 million household universe is a big enough universe. So I think we're starting to get there. 3-4 years as that starts to roll out, that's enough scale. Most display, data-driven display media buying is right now they're looking at 5 million, 10 million, 20 million segments. Yeah, I can address 186 million people, but it's rarely do I get all of them online at the same time anyway. So I think we're early, but we're not that early anymore. I don't think this will be a new silo inside the marketing organization. I think the supply side's got to figure out where does it live, because they've never had the level of analytics and yield management that they're going to need now. For the other analytics people, it's okay, it's just another channel with another set of data points. I've got 1,500 data points today. Tomorrow I'm going to have 2,000 data points. But the other issue is we're going to start to collect a massive amount of additional data, which is going to put a lot of pressure on how do I track this data, how do I manage the data, how do I secure the data security being a huge issue. So I think it's going to give rise to yet another set of players to go live on the chart. And then you have folks like Omniture, who are doing that clickstream tracking in the offline world. Yep. Well, who's going to be the Omniture here? Will Adobe wait to see somebody arise and then step in and buy them like they bought Omniture, like Omniture then bought Demdex, which is a data management platform? So I think we're going to see a lot of change around this.
So let's turn to the balance of power that all of this affects within the buyer and seller community. And let me be a skeptic here, thinking about TV sellers. We mentioned that TV is $70 billion a year industry. It's going to grow 10% this year, I think, from what we're hearing about the upfront. So let's say TV is going to pull in another $7-8 billion this year. Well, I mean that's practically the size of the entire display industry as a whole. So if I'm a TV seller and I'm just seeing that macroeconomic effects are bringing in more money, and this whole ecosystem just starts to provide greater transparency, and that may not actually be a good thing for me. So why don't I just say, forget all this. I'm happy to say TV kind of goes through some nice ups and downs. We're going through a nice upcycle. Maybe we'll continue to go through a nice upcycle. Let's just keep going with this, and I'll just pass on addressable television. Why don't they do that, Praveen?
Well, actually, I do believe that if no benefit accrues to the seller, they will do that, because unlike the internet, you cannot buy around TV. It's still the only mass reach medium out there, right? So you can't buy American Idol elsewhere in that context. You may be able to get the audience in some sort of fragmented way elsewhere, but you can't buy it in that context. So I think the sellers will not have any incentive to participate in addressable until they'll only have incentive if they make more. And to the point Chris made earlier, you need new advertisers to come in, and you need new money to come in for that pie to in fact increase.
I think, if I could say, the horse is already out of the barn, because it's inevitable that it's going to happen. It's already starting to happen. Our deal with DirecTV is a proof point of that. That is new revenue to DirecTV that they were not realizing previously. We know that there are other operators that are developing products. So what we're going to see is advertising dollars are going to flow to the sources that will allow them to address to their target market. And if that means that dollars fall out of national television and into operator-based delivery for a while, then that's going to hurt the national programmers, and eventually they'll be forced to consider addressable models in order to win that revenue back.
Well, let me...
well, if I can just jump on that real quick.
Sure.
One of the things I think is interesting about that is, so we take American Idol with, 50 million unique viewers, and everyone's getting the same advertisement. What a perfect forum to actually add value to a handful of advertisers that may want to cherry pick the top or the bottom of that pool, because you've already sold the space. So now you can preempt some percentage of that 50 million uniques and say, well, we're going to charge a little bit more if you want to reach the people who have $100,000 of assets, Fidelity. We're going to charge a little bit less if you want to, sell a CPG product which has mass appeal. We're going to find a way. You have the opportunity to build that supply artificially in a sold-out environment through potentially one or maybe two segments added on top of that. And that is a huge increase in the net revenues that doesn't have to take very much away from that overall reach sale that you're doing today for that channel.
But I would argue that it's not about American Idol. It's about all of the other channels and programming that maybe gets, 1 million households watching, or 500,000 households. For them, it's a yield game.
Yep.
And if they can attract more revenue through addressable, they will do that. And they'll steal it from display.
They may. I agree with that. But I think it is an effective cost per your target audience. Right? That's where online's moved over the last 18 months, is what's my effective cost per reaching the people that matter to me? And that's what makes a Yahoo or a Microsoft or an AOL very nervous, is if they're selling reach against the channel, but they can't back up that effective cost, that's a problem. And I think that problem is going to migrate to TV. And the question is, how do you solve that most effectively?
Bruce, let me get your perspective on this, because it sounds like everybody's going to be happy in this new world as long as we can prove to the sellers that they're making more money. Okay, well that's great. I think it's easier said than done. Bruce, where do you think the money's coming from? Can we, Jessica Reef Cohen thinks it's all going to come from direct mail. I mean, do you think that that is feasible, that direct mail marketers are going to suddenly start spending money in television because it has a similar level of targetability as direct mail has?
Does it have a similar effectiveness is actually the real question. So we forecast direct mail. We're one of 2 companies that do. And our forecast is 5.6% growth on a $47 billion industry. And through the first 4 months of the year, it's tracking, which is pretty robust growth. So it's about $48 billion. We think it's going to hover in the 1 to 2% growth range actually over the next couple of years. So no, the money's not actually coming from there because it works. It's really easy. I need to turn it up. I don't have to get somebody's permission. I'm just going to make more mail, and I'm going to print. And as long as I get my response rates, it works. And the problem with online marketing right now is if it's retention, and I can use email and other substitutes, that's working very well. If I can do retargeting, it's working really well. Display for acquisition, it's not working so well. They don't have the bugs fixed yet, even in spite of the amount of money that's coming in there. So direct mail's not losing share. I think it's still going to come from newspaper, which newspaper in 2006 was a $46 billion business. Newspaper in 2014, we're looking at somewhere in the neighborhood of $21 billion, which is about $4 or $5 billion more will disappear. So some of that money definitely coming out of newspapers, some of it probably coming out of magazines. Some of it will come as the online channels mature. We are going to see share shift. We will see money shift around there. Plus, you get about, when GDP goes up 2 or 3 points, you get typically 4 or 5 points of growth in ad spend. So new money goes to these new channels. It's part of test budgets. And so I think this is new money, not money out of somewhere else, for at least 2 to 3 years.
Chris, do you agree with that, that the likely biggest competitor to addressable television is actually display?
I don't know. I honestly haven't given that one a lot of thought. I think that at this point, advertisers really perceive video dollars as serving typically a different role than display. So I don't know that that's necessarily how my brands will view it. I think a lot of them are really keen to the idea that, if I'm General Motors and I know that only 1.5% of the public is in market at any given time, and I have the ability to slash my television budget pretty dramatically and still reach my intended target audience, then that is of huge value to me. And so that means that they can reinvest those television dollars potentially into additional television campaigns. We can start to segment our campaigns even further, or we can do more test and learn on other platforms. I think it also presents, in some ways, a renaissance opportunity for the creative side of our business, because suddenly television ads that have been created with sort of a broad audience in mind suddenly there's a demand for a lot more different types of creative that's more targeted to these individual segments. So, my brethren over at Leo Burnett are going to get really excited when they suddenly are getting new TV budgets. So some of that savings from the working media that is saved in addressable can actually be applied to creative.
So on that ad ops side on creative, if we think about significant increase in versioning, if I want to do versioning in display, I'm flipping pieces of a screen. It's actually pretty straightforward and pretty easy. Versioning in video, it's going to be a lot more work.
I agree, definitely. Yeah, I mean, that creates another challenge for the market and more
Another
complexity.
revenue stream.
Right. But operationally, I mean, given the internet was born addressable, and it took about a good like 12 years until people started using versioning techniques there. I mean, that's why I still think it's still going to be some ways off until it starts creating these new revenue streams, and from an agency perspective, more operational load, really, to in fact support new versions and new creatives as you guys deal with the traffic in this ecosystem.
Let me. I think we're getting the hand signal here, which says let's go into the final round here. I think this has been fascinating. I think this is a very interesting topic. And could go on much longer because we really are starting to get to the heart of how this industry is going to evolve, and there's a great deal of complexity to it. But Jonathan, as we look out over the next few years, and you've been in display for a long time, what do you want to see happen in the TV ecosystem based on what you lived through in display?
I mean, I think one of the biggest challenges over this transformation that is going to come is how do we balance the scales so that it really can lift all boats, right? That we can find that right mechanism, and that requires, I think, transformation more at the operator side, the network side. The buy side is always going to be looking for an advantage, and so there has to be investment in how you bring these things forward. And I think some faith in saying, how do you build the right yield models, and looking at that as your core problem, right? How can you extract more value off scarce inventory, right? Do you expand the inventory for targeting, or do you simply, just look at ways to better describe the inventory to create more value? I think that one of the big things to avoid is how you treat perfect addressability, right? And how you look at that as a solution across your distribution channels, right? So while the form factor for sight, sound, and motion is fairly terrible today, it's going to get better, and it's one-to-one reach. And I think that's part of the equation over the next couple of years is TV everywhere and how you're going to solve for that perfect addressability, because it's going to be moving and fragmenting with that same household, but you have different ways to be more accurate in who you're reaching.
And Chris, what do you want to see not happen?
Oh, I wanted to tell you what I want to see to happen. To not happen.
It's the trick question.
Oh, you put a twist. I don't want to see, how about I do it this way? I don't want to see the operators continue to hold on to their set-top box data. So release the data. We've been saying it for years.
Did you bring Tracy's buttons?
I should have worn my button. Set-top box data holds a lot of power in this new marketplace, and so we would love to see more of that data released. I think we don't need to hold on to old conventions about the way television is bought and sold. So we live in an era where everything is, I'd say 95% of what we're doing is really based on context, right? So we spend a lot of time looking at the context of programming and the determination of where we place our ads. Yeah, we talk about age and gender, but we're doing that off a 20,000 household panel sample of Nielsen that isn't possibly representative of the television landscape today, right? So we have a huge opportunity as we start to get set-top box data to look at more of an audience-centric approach to television buying, and that doesn't mean that we discount context, because context is still going to be important, but we're going to have the ability to refine our targeting capabilities so much more, and then context sort of becomes the fine-tuning on top of that to really make that message resonate with the right consumer.
And Praveen, from the simulmedia perspective, what do you think will be a key event or milestone of when we know we're there?
I think one, having about a good footprint of about 40 to 50 million addressable, a footprint of 40 million addressable households. That's one from the infrastructure perspective. From the demand perspective, I don't know what number that is, and when that happens, but because you look back at the internet, and given it took 12, 13 years for folks to start buying behavioral and start buying audience-centric, start buying media in an audience-centric way, I'm still a bit. Um, I guess I still think it will take a long time for that to happen. I don't know what performance indicator or what budget indicator it takes to indicate that we're there. I do want to address one of the points, Chris, you raised earlier, is that I think the operators are open to giving their data out there. I think they're a bit skeptical about giving it to an agency today because they are really fearful that you guys will use it against them ultimately. I mean,
I think they also believe their data may be worth more than it might be.
That's possible, but I think ultimately
Let the negotiations begin.
Ultimately I feel that they want it. I feel they want to charge you that much because they feel they'll lose it on the media. Ultimately,
that could be another panel, is whether or not the data should really be open to the marketplace, or do we establish a new currency with set-top box data?
That'll be
free.
TVOT 2011 in New York. Bruce, let me just provide some closing thoughts. Is this all going to happen?
Yes. That was really
all right. Thank you very much.
I think it's going to happen sooner. I think the technology is going to get there fast. The technology will get there before the market is there. As the market starts to catch up, the investment is going to come from the outside because they'll look and they'll say $61 billion plus another $15 billion of DRTV. There's a lot of broadcast media money, and they're going to say that's the pie, and every entrepreneur will go sell against that pie. But this is a much more closed ecosystem, so it won't be as addressable. But I think, if I've got to give an outlook, I think 2012, we start to really see a pickup. In 2013, this starts to go. And watch election cycles as well. Polling around elections. So I think that's the back half of 12 is where this gets very interesting.
Well, we know how the sellers have enjoyed the political pie and political years. I think we may have time for just a couple of questions. So, anyone from the audience? Right, thank you. And can you just announce your name and organization you're from?
Sure, this is Frank Sandoval from Cable Lab. So we've been working on doing some of the technical specifications and interfaces to support this sort of thing. So what sorts of technologies or approaches do the MSOs have to adopt and implement to support this?
Let me just clarify, is that for a trading platform or for...
Well, to actually, have a specific ad placed in front of me as a viewer. What sorts of things do, the set-top box, the DVR, the VOD platform, what are the enabling technologies? How do we physically do it?
You planned this one?
Is this to me? I think this one's to me. And of course, Walt Michael is going to start shooting arrows at me when I say that anything is proprietary. So I think between there are Visible World, the company I'm from, provides a comprehensive architecture to provide addressable advertising, as well as DirecTV has deployed the capability to tune to the ads on the DVR. So I think that there are a series of companies who are in the space to provide that core capability. I think as we start to get it deployed, will be determined sort of how the migrations occur to standards. I think probably the second part of the question is to what extent are there standards about how some of the trading platforms that Chris is working on may have to do some interfaces into other stewardship systems. But I think, does that answer your question?
To be fair, NVIDIA is the other big player that Walt didn't want to mention that makes it addressable at the set-top box. And there are a couple of platforms out there to help enable this right now. So Google TV Ads is a fairly well-known one. And then Microsoft has a product that was formerly called Admira, and now it's being rebranded to Microsoft TV Network, I think. So those are a couple of platforms out there that really start to use technology to optimize ad placement and make those decisions.
So custom, proprietary, vertically integrated solutions. Is how you see it playing out.
I don't, from a trading platform perspective, we don't see it as being a proprietary system at all. We actually would love to develop a marketplace that is really open to the entire ecosystem so that we have, rather than 400 DSPs like you saw in that crazy chart up there where everybody thinks they have the secret sauce, we have one centralized marketplace that everyone can come to. You may have your own dials that you can turn that becomes your secret sauce in the way you do your optimization, or you buy specific data sets, or you use your own proprietary data in that marketplace. But essentially all of the inventory is being traded through that single platform. That would be my perfect world.
And I think the trading side of it, that's more about web services and having the right APIs. I think it's what you have to put into the set-top box, what you have to put into the head end. That's actually the bigger challenge. Because once it leaves there, the rest of the stuff's actually pretty much built out.
And if I may, I just say that we had 2 requests for release of the data, but I think the first investment has to be in understanding your own set-top box data and having the analytical resources and the data warehousing capabilities to glean information out of that data, whether it's direct or with a vendor, so that you know what you're releasing out into the wild, right? And so that you can start building your own proprietary models for what's valuable and what's not for various advertisers. I think failure to take advantage of first-party data is something we would see in the online ecosystem, and I think that would be one that you wouldn't want to replicate, regardless of the technical solutions.
You just need more analytics staff. And of course, that's the biggest shortage in the industry right now.
Always.
And will probably stay that way for another couple of years. Because almost every channel that emerges, whether it's mobile, social, addressable, they all require more analytics horsepower. The tools have gotten better. There just still aren't enough math people in the marketing world.
So more mathemagic for media. Let me close with that, and thanks to this panel. Appreciate all of your insights, and let's give everyone a round of applause.
Thank you.